In 1991, more than 50% of the entire word processing market ran on one piece of software. Lawyers used it, government agencies used it, writers used it. It wasn't just popular. For most of a decade, in most offices in America, it simply was what word processing meant. By the year 2000, that same software held about 5% of the market. A New York Times reporter, writing that year, noted that most people were now surprised to even learn it still existed. This was word processing, built by a music student turned programmer and a university professor in Utah, who beat every competitor in the word processing market for nearly a decade, and then lost almost the entire thing in about 5 years. Sold once, sold again, eventually reduced to a niche product for law firms and government holdouts. This is the story of word processing, and a decision, or rather a delay, that title after title in this genre keeps circling back to. What happens when a great product bets wrong on the platform underneath it? Welcome back to Boardroom Ruins, where we dig into the companies that built entire industries and then watch those industries move on without them. If you've been here before, you know how this goes. No fluff, no filler. Just the real decisions, the real numbers, and the real moments where it all started to come apart. If you're new, consider this your warning. Once you start seeing how these collapses actually happen, you start noticing the same patterns everywhere. Hit subscribe now because you're going to want to see the next one. All right, back to the story. The story starts in 1976 at Brigham Young University in Utah. Alan Ashton, a computer science professor, had an idea for a fundamentally better kind of word processor, one that would eventually display formatting the way it would actually look on a printed page, rather than hiding it behind cryptic codes. Ashton recruited a graduate student named Bruce Bashton to help build it. Bashton actually switched his own graduate studies from music to computer science specifically to work on the project. The two of them built the software under a contract with the city of Orem, Utah, for a Data General mini-computer, and critically, the city allowed them to keep the commercial rights to what they created. In September 1979, Ashton and Bashton, along with marketing executive Don Owens, incorporated their business as Satellite Software International. Their first version for the Data General mini-computer shipped in 1980. In 1982, the company ported its software to the IBM PC, and it was here that the product truly took off, under the name that would define it, WordPerfect. At the time, WordStar was the reigning market leader. WordPerfect's feature set was considerably more advanced, most famously its Reveal Codes function, which let users directly inspect and edit the underlying formatting codes in a document, rather than working blind behind a simplified visual layer. It became one of the software's most beloved, defining features. Growth was extraordinary. The company went from 6 employees in 1980 to over 4,000 within a decade. By 1986, following the release of WordPerfect 4.2, the software had decisively overtaken WordStar. By 1989, with WordPerfect 5.1, it was the standard in the DOS word processing market. By 1991, DOS WordPerfect alone brought in $533 million in annual sales, and the company was worth billions of dollars. Ashton, Bashton, and executive W.E. Pete Peterson ran the company almost like a private triumvirate. Ashton and Bashton each held 49.5% ownership, and the company carried no debt at all, a genuinely rare position for a software company growing this fast. Then came the shift that would define the rest of the company's history. The personal computer industry's move from DOS's command line interface to Windows's graphical one. WordPerfect's first Windows version, 5.1 for Windows, arrived in late 1991, but it required installation from DOS and suffered from real instability. A more stable version, 5.2, didn't arrive until November 1992, and even then, it still lagged behind in native Windows optimization. Meanwhile, Microsoft was building its own word processor, Word, with a critical structural advantage. Since Microsoft also built Windows itself, Word could use programming interfaces and integration points that outside developers, including WordPerfect Corporation, didn't have equal access to. Multiple people close to the company at the time pointed to a deeper organizational problem behind the technical delay. Ashton and Bashton, despite jointly running the company, reportedly had real cultural and philosophical differences that distracted from decisively confronting the shift to Windows early enough.
The company had, in the words of one industry observer, plenty of time to respond to it, but chose not to for whatever reason.
While WordPerfect struggled with an unstable, delayed transition, Microsoft moved aggressively, bundling Word directly into the increasingly dominant Microsoft Office suite, giving customers a financial and practical incentive to switch to Word even if they'd never used it before. By the time WordPerfect released more competitive Windows versions, 6.0 in 1993, 6.1 in 1994, the damage to its market position was already substantial, and Word's momentum, backed by Office bundling and native Windows integration, had become close to unstoppable. Facing heavy internal pressure, the founders' families wanted to realize the wealth the company had created, and WordPerfect needed to look more attractive as an employer in an increasingly consolidating software industry. WordPerfect Corporation began seeking a buyer or merger partner in the early 1990s. In March 1994, WordPerfect signed a merger agreement with Novell, another Utah-based software company known for computer networking, in a stock deal valued at roughly $1.4 billion. Ashton and Bastian each stood to net close to $700 million in Novell shares. In the very same period, Novell also acquired Borland's spreadsheet business, Quattro Pro, for approximately $145 million, hoping to bundle WordPerfect and Quattro Pro together into a rival Office suite that could genuinely compete with Microsoft Office. It didn't work. WordPerfect's market share, still a healthy 50% as recently as 1995, collapsed to roughly 5% by the year 2000. Novell gave up on the strategy remarkably quickly. Within just 2 years, it sold the entire WordPerfect product line to the Canadian company Corel in January 1996 for around $124 million. Novell had either chromatically overpaid at $1.4 billion just 2 years earlier, or watched the product lose the vast majority of its value in that short window. Multiple industry accounts suggest bluntly that both things were probably true at once. The story doesn't end with a straightforward sale, though. Years later, Novell, still holding on to the belief that Microsoft's own conduct during this exact period had unfairly crushed WordPerfect's chances, filed an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. Novell's central argument was that Microsoft had used undocumented Windows programming interfaces to give its own Office applications, including Word, an unfair technical advantage that outside developers were denied. The case, Novell versus Microsoft, actually went to a jury trial. Microsoft ultimately prevailed. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in 2013 that Microsoft had no legal duty to share those interfaces with a competitor. Novell's appeal later that year did not overturn the result. Whether or not you find Novell's legal theory persuasive, the case itself tells you something important. This wasn't dismissed by everyone involved as a simple story of one company just failing to keep up. Some of the people closest to it spent years and a federal court case, arguing it was something closer to being outmaneuvered by design.
Under Corel's ownership, WordPerfect didn't disappear entirely. Corel bundled it into WordPerfect Office alongside Quattro Pro and a presentation tool, marketed specifically toward the customers who never left, primarily law firms, government agencies, and longtime loyalists who valued the Reveal Codes feature and the software's specific formatting behavior that Word had never quite replicated. Corel has continued to release updated versions for decades since, including a classic mode designed specifically to win back users frustrated by how different WordPerfect for Windows felt from the DOS version they'd originally loved. It never came remotely close to reclaiming its former dominance. Today, WordPerfect survives as a small, devoted niche product, maintained mostly for the legal industry and a handful of institutional holdouts, not as a serious rival to Word, but as a name still technically alive, decades after most computer users assumed it wasn't. So what actually happened to WordPerfect? By now, if you've watched our videos on Lotus and Borland, you'll recognize the shape of this story immediately, and that's not a coincidence. All three companies built genuinely superior DOS-era products. All three were slow or wrong on the transition to Windows, and all three lost their category to Microsoft within almost the exact same few years in the early to mid-1990s. What makes WordPerfect's version distinct is how directly some of the people involved believed it wasn't simply a fair loss, carrying that belief all the way to a federal antitrust trial decades after the actual product had already faded from most people's daily lives. Whether you look at WordPerfect as a company that moved too slowly or a company that got structurally outmaneuvered by a rival that also controlled the platform underneath it, the practical outcome was the same. The market leader for a decade became a rounding error within about 5 years. There's a pattern worth sitting with across all three of these companies together. Genuinely excellent software built by genuinely talented people isn't enough on its own, not when the company controlling the operating system underneath you is also building the product competing against you. If you found this one interesting, we've also covered Lotus and Borland, the other two companies that lost this exact same fight to the exact same rival in almost the exact same years. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.